This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and today we're going to do a smackdown between two top Android phones. On this side, we have the LG G2. This one's available on a lot of carriers. Right now, we've got a little bit of a T-Mobile focus going because this is the Sony Xperia Z1S that just came out on T-Mobile. You have your choice of both. Of course, internationally, this is available as the Z1, so many of you have the choice between these phones. We're going to look at them now. Alright, it's the battle between two, well, sort of underdogs here in the US. LG has been struggling to get more market share. Of course, Samsung is the gorilla in the room there. And Sony, well, it's not enough US carriers carry Sony phones. That's the problem. Overseas, if you're watching this from Europe, I know Sony Xperia phones are quite popular and they're easy to get from a variety of carriers. But here in the US, kind of out of luck. Thankfully, T-Mobile US, like Sony. So we had the Xperia Z from then, and now the Xperia Z1S. The Z1S is pretty much the same thing as the Z1 for those folks who are overseas or thinking about getting the unlocked version to use on a carrier like AT&T. Really, the bands change, headphone jack placement moves a little bit. Otherwise, you're really looking at pretty much the same thing. So here, LG G2, Sony Xperia Z1S. LG G2 has been on the market since September. The Sony Xperia Z1S just came out for us in the US this week, which means the end of January 2014. However, it's been out overseas for a couple of months, so pretty close together in release times there. Both of these run Android 4.2 on the LG, 4.3 on the Sony. Now, LG hasn't had the greatest track record for OS updates, but they have been improving. Sony gets them done. They just seem to take a long time. So when it comes to that kind of thing, hey, who knows? Sony does promise they are working on 4.4 KitKat for this phone, though. When we get beyond that, both 5-inch class phones, if we want to use TV terminology, actually 5.2 inches for the LG and 5 inches for the Sony, both full 1080 displays. However, funny thing is, notice the LG is actually a little bit smaller, a little bit shorter. See the difference in height right there? Even though it has a bigger display, because they have their almost bezel-less design. Of course, there's some on the top and the bottom, but still, Sony has a lot more dead space up top and on the bottom. So for those of you who want it as small as possible, something to keep in mind. Also, the LG is very curvy. It's very hand-friendly. It just feels nice in your hand. There's no pokey edges anywhere. Sony, on the other hand, now, the corners are all rounded. There's no sharp edges, nothing like that going on. But it's obviously a very rectangular design. It's bigger, it's square. It might feel a little less comfortable in the hand. I would certainly say that it does. They're both very thin phones. You can see right here. LG hides the thickness a little bit by doing that curve, but you're looking at thin phones either way. Now, when it comes to looks, here's the first important thing. Some people really care about the looks of their phone, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it is a piece of very personal electronics. It can be a fashion statement. Look how popular the iPhone is. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's a very attractive-looking phone. Sony is one of those attractive, classy-looking glass phones. It's modern. It has an Xperia design language. It's angular. It's black. We have the glass on the back. It's pretty unique looking. It really, the Xperia language is recognizable, distinct, and attractive looking. Only available in black on T-Mobile, by the way. No colors. I know overseas Sony likes to have a couple of different color glass backs to choose from, but just black. LG, on the other hand, is of the Samsung school, or the Korean school of phone making. If it ain't shiny and plastic, it ain't made by them. So what you got right here is shiny, frank plastic. So those of you who just really detest that, you prefer the HTC One, the iPhone, or something like the Xperia Z1S, there's the difference. This is not a bad looking phone by any means. It just is shiny plastic. It loves fingerprints. So does the Sony, however. The Sony is washable. This, wipe it down with a damn cloth. This is available in your choice of black or white. Washable. Neat idea, right? For those of you who work in wet conditions outdoors, you play by the pool a lot, you're simply a klutz. This is waterproof. It's also dust-proof, too. So that's pretty unique. Usually you see that in something like a Kyocera Hydro rugged phone, not very attractive or high-end phones. It's pretty rare to have that in what you would call a classy, elegant-looking phone. So Xperia for the win there. Those of you who are Adrian Monk types and you simply just want to wash your phone down, you can really just make sure all the port doors are closed over here. There are plenty of them around here. Stick it under the faucet, soap it up, dry it off. There it is. Now LG fights back a bit when it comes to displays. 5.2 versus 5 inches. Okay, 0.2 inches, not such a big deal there. The fact they squeeze into a smaller phone, pretty darn impressive. Both full HD 1920 by 1080 resolution, both very colorful. I give the LG a win here for having somewhat better viewing angles. You can see how that's shifting too. As IPS displays go, and that's what LG is using, funny, this doesn't have the widest viewing angles I've ever seen. Sony has a triluminous display, and you can see the viewing angles also do fade. And if you just heard that life is good, creepy, singy thing, that leads to the next point. But first, let's just finish up with the displays. I actually prefer the Sony display when watching movies because it has a more cinematic look. Rich colors, it's more color accurate. The LG is kind of on the cool side. It just looks like a movie theater experience. But for everyday use, there's more contrast, and I think the LG probably gets the edge with most people there. They're both quite viewable outdoors. So, back to that little creepy jingle you just heard, the child choir singing Life is Good. Lots of software on the LG. For those of you who like Samsung TouchWiz, this is not unlike a Samsung TouchWiz experience. LG really was going for a Samsung kind of experience, but that means kind of cartoony icons, lots of UI customization everywhere. Some of it good. You can have some floating windows as sort of like widgets in an application. It's going to remind you about a whole bunch of different features like it just did right there, because there are so many. You get LG's idea of great alert sounds like the little singing child choir. Overall, some things I do like are it's real easy to customize your home screen. So you just press and hold right there. You got apps, you got widgets, you got your wallpapers. They put some things right at your fingertips. They're both Android. They are both customizable. Sony, on the other hand, goes for a very clean Android experience, which I personally do prefer. It's not Nexus clean, but they haven't really messed with things too much. Standard multiple home screens going on here. Application tray with the fade background that you've got selected here. They don't really do too much to it. You can slide in, you can get some management for your applications there, which I think is pretty nice, but pretty low key. Mostly what they do is they add their applications. You've got the Walkman app for music, you've got the PlayStation mobile application, and their movies app. And sure, these are here in part because they would love to sell you their services. They'd like you to rent, buy movies from them. They would love you to use PlayStation ecosystem, but a lot of you actually do use the PlayStation ecosystem. Even if you don't, they're very nice applications. They have one-touch access to things like your equalization, and you can see cool things like whatever last video was I watched is playing there in the background. It has access to media service, so those of you who have network drives at home or at work, you can actually play directly from DLNA without installing any other applications. So, me personally, I give Sony the win for that. I like cleaner Android better. I don't like my icons messed with. I don't want a million software features I don't want, but I do appreciate some good apps that actually improve my multimedia experience. We're all different. Some of you will actually like the customizations on the LG, but that's for you to decide. Clean versus highly customized, in other words. We don't usually spend a lot of time looking at the back of our phone. Well, in this case we do. LG has the volume controls and the power sleep wake button on the back here. The idea is that your index finger is going to fall right there when you're holding the phone, and for the most part it actually does, but that's something to keep in mind. It is a little bit odd, a little bit different. Sony has the controls on the side. They got their little Xperia style round metal button right there for your on-off sleep wake, and we have our volume controls over here. Other things to talk about: battery sealed inside on both of these, 3000 milliamp on both of these, both very good battery life on these. When it comes to expandable storage, first off, we have 32 gigs on both of these, also 2 gigs of RAM, but the Sony has a micro SD card slot compatible with SDXC cards. The LG does not have expandable storage. For those of you who care about such things, well, that's an important difference right there. They're both running on the same Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 CPU. That's a quad-core CPU with Adreno 330 graphics running at 2.26 gigahertz. They benchmark pretty much identically. You're going to get similar performance. LG's skin can at times slow things down a little bit. I'll give you a little stutter, a little pause, but actually not nearly as bad as Samsung TouchWiz there. Since that's currently the top of the line smartphone CPU, the best you can get on Android, both of them are equally future-proof. And while we're looking at the back, another thing is the camera. The Sony is particularly interesting to photographers because it has the highest resolution camera available on an Android smartphone, 20.7 megapixels on board there with Sony's G series lens, fast lens f2.0. Now, the LG actually has a very nice camera on it. When we reviewed it, I was really enamored with it. 13 megapixels, so not as flashy there. Pretty good lens on it, also quite fast, but it takes very good photos and 1080p video. Really, I found that it beat out the Galaxy S4 when it comes to photo taking, but it's a tougher order to beat out something like the Xperia camera here. Megapixels do count, and I have to say that when taking pictures, you're going to notice more detail. Now, for those of you who like cameras, but you don't care all that much, you're not into photography seriously, you're not going to use this for big photos. If you need a higher resolution image for bigger images on a website, not just little small things sharing on Facebook, if you want to print these things out, if you want to thrill your family with vacation photos that you're going to show on a big screen TV, the Sony is going to win. It does resolve more data. It also manages to capture more color. Generally speaking, the shots are more impressive, more pleasing, more lifelike, really good saturation from the photos that we've taken with this. The LG has a good camera, not quite as good with saturation. They're both guilty of a little over-sharpening at times. Now, where the LG fights back is it has optical image stabilization. That means there's hardware in there that keeps everything steady. So that's pretty important if you're shooting video, particularly. You don't want to, people are watching your video going boom, 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 boom. They're getting a little bit sick there. That takes care of it. We just have digital image stabilization on the Sony. So if you shoot a lot of video, keep that in mind. You got 60 frames per second and optical image stabilization. It's a closer race there when it comes to video. When it comes to web browsing and data speeds, we're looking at neck and neck here. This particular LG G2 is actually on the AT&T network, not on T-Mobile, but same difference otherwise. You're going to get fast LTE data speeds on both of these phones. Voice quality is also quite good on both of these phones as well. The LG got dinged for not having the loudest speakerphone, but the same thing is true of the Xperia Z1S, and that's because of the waterproofing, the sealing around the actual speaker, the bottom. So they both have, just okay volume for their speakerphones. In terms of pricing, that is really going to depend on your carrier and where you are. On T-Mobile, the LG G2 started at $600, but they just dropped it down to $500, and that's the full retail price. Or you can do their monthly payment plans, and then there's a $1.20 difference between these phones because the Sony is currently at $528. It's brand new, so that's the rollout price on that. I would call that close enough. $30 between phones is not really important. Don't make your decision based on $30 difference in full retail price of the phones or $1.20 a month, honestly. One thing that's funny that we don't have on the Sony that we do have on our friend the LG here, the LG has an IR remote. It has a home theater AV control. Now that's something that Sony was big into, but that is something that they actually left out of the Xperia Z1 and Z1S. So if you're dying to use your phone to control your TV, your AV receiver, your DVR, that kind of thing, the LG is the one for you. The Sony doesn't have that feature. When it comes to the other goodies, basic specs, they both have Wi-Fi 802.11 BGN and AC dual band, Bluetooth 4.0, NFC, a GPS with GLONASS. So even playing field once again between these two phones when it comes to that. By the way, they both have on-screen buttons. Obviously, there are not capacitive buttons here. These are on-screen buttons that take up a little bit of your screen real estate. So that's the LG G2 versus the Sony Xperia Z1 or Z1S in this case. And as you can see, it's not an easy choice. I myself would agonize over this choice a bit. They're really both very nice phones. It depends on what's more important to you. Really good looks, classy design versus ergonomic comfort versus IPS display or the triluminous display. There is no clear winner here. That's my takeaway. But for you, after looking at all the points we've covered, you might say, hey, now I really know which phone's for you. And I hope that's the case. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to watch our video reviews of each of these phones, read our written reviews, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.